The mahogany desk, polished to a gleam that mirrored the city lights twinkling outside the panoramic window, seemed to amplify the silence stretching between Ammani and her father. Vernon Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Lux Properties, steepled his fingers, the rhythmic tap against the polished wood the only sound in the opulent office. Ammani shifted her weight, the plush carpet giving no resistance, the silence pressing in on her like a physical force. She could feel the weight of his gaze, a palpable thing in the dimly lit room, assessing, calculating. He's not going to agree, a voice whispered in the back of her mind. The thought sent a tremor of anxiety down her spine, a chilling premonition that settled deep in her stomach. A janitor? Vernon finally spoke, his voice a low rumble that resonated in the spacious room. The single word hung in the air, heavy with skepticism. Ammani watched him, her heart a tight, knot in her chest. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than she remembered. He carries the weight of this empire on his shoulders, she thought, a sudden pang of empathy softening her resolve for just a moment. But then the image flashed in her mind again, Rosa, her face etched with weariness, scrubbing at a stubborn stain on the marble floor, her gaze fixed on some distant point. The empathy morphed into a steely determination. Yes, Ammani replied, her voice steady, though her pulse thrummed against her ribs. She met his gaze, refusing to flinch. Undercover. Janine Walker. Nobody will know. She forced a casual shrug, an attempt to appear nonchalant, though her insides were a churning vortex of anticipation and apprehension. She could practically taste the metallic tang of fear at the back of her throat. This was a gamble, a high-stakes game she was playing, and the thought of her father's disapproval was a heavy burden to bear. Vernon leaned back in his leather chair, the soft creak a counterpoint to the silence that had descended again. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes, obscuring his thoughts, making him seem even more remote, more unreadable. Ammani fought the urge to fidget, to fill the silence with nervous chatter. He thinks I'm naive, she thought, the realization a bitter pill to swallow. He thinks this is some childish whim. The thought stung, but it also fueled her resolve. She had to make him understand. You're serious about this? He finally asked, his voice laced with a mixture of disbelief and concern. Ammani detected a hint of something else too. Was it apprehension? The thought was a flicker of hope in the darkness. Dead serious, Ammani affirmed, her voice ringing with conviction. Let me do 1 week at Marina Blue. I'll take notes, document everything. See how they treat the people they think don't matter. The words hung in the air, charged with an intensity that crackled between them. He studied her, his gaze intense, searching. Ammani held his gaze, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, recognition, understanding. She couldn't be sure. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. She imagined the wheels turning in his mind, the complex calculations he was making, weighing the risks, the potential fallout. He was a businessman, after all, accustomed to assessing situations from all angles, anticipating every possible outcome. It's dangerous, Ammani, he said, his voice low, laced with a thread of worry that she hadn't expected. It surprised her, this unguarded moment of paternal concern. For a fleeting second, she almost regretted putting him in this position. But then she remembered Rose's tired eyes, the slumped shoulders, the quiet resignation in her voice. I know, she replied, her voice soft but firm. But it's important. She leaned forward, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her gaze unwavering. I need to see it for myself. I need to understand. She wasn't just talking about the working conditions at Marina Blue. She was talking about the chasm that separated her world from theirs, a chasm she desperately wanted to bridge. Vernon sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. He ran a hand over his face, the gesture revealing a vulnerability she rarely saw. He looked older, more fragile than she remembered. The sight tugged at her heartstrings. 1 week, he finally said, his voice heavy with resignation. 1 week, Ammani. And if anything happens, his voice trailed off, leaving the unspoken threat hanging in the air. Ammani nodded, a surge of triumph coursing through her veins. She had done it. She had convinced him. But beneath the triumph, a different emotion stirred, a sense of unease, a premonition of the darkness she was about to enter. The Marina Blue, her father's flagship hotel, a glittering beacon of luxury and opulence. She was about to see it from a different perspective, a perspective that would forever change her perception of the world she inhabited. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the journey ahead, the journey into the heart of the unknown. The industrial hum of the Marina Blue's service elevator was a stark contrast to the hushed elegance of the guest floors. Ammani, or rather Janine, as her name tag declared, leaned against the metal wall, the vibration a low thrum against her back. Each descent felt like sinking deeper into a hidden world, one far removed from the sparkling chandeliers and champagne flutes above. The metallic scent of the elevator mingled with the faint, lingering aroma of cleaning chemicals, a constant reminder of her new reality. Janine Walker. The name felt foreign on her tongue, a thin veil between her and the truth. It was a necessary deception, a mask she wore to see the unvarnished truth of her father's empire. The fluorescent lights of the basement storage room cast long, distorted shadows. Ammani's footsteps echoed in the cavernous space as she retrieved her cleaning cart. The silence, broken only by the distant clatter of a laundry machine, amplified the loneliness. It was a different kind of silence than the hushed stillness of the guest suites. This silence was heavy, laden with the unspoken grievances of the unseen hands that kept the Marina Blue pristine. They are invisible, she thought, the realization a cold knot in her stomach. And in their invisibility, they are forgotten. Over the next few nights, the routine became a ritual. The squeak of the cart wheels, the rhythmic swish of the mop, the sting of disinfectant on her skin, these were the new markers of her time. She observed, documented, and internalized. Each interaction, each overheard conversation, was another piece of the puzzle, revealing a pattern of disregard that ran deeper than she'd imagined. Trey, with his perfectly coiffed hair and practiced smile for the guests, transformed into a different person when dealing with the staff. His tone, usually smooth and charming, became clipped and condescending. He'd bark orders, make snide remarks, and dismiss any request with a wave of his hand. Ammani watched him ignore Rosa's plea for a new mop bucket, the old one cracked and leaking dirty water across the freshly polished floor. Rosa, a woman whose face bore the quiet dignity of years of hard work, simply sighed and continued mopping, the dirty water seeping into her worn shoes. The injustice of it simmered in Ammani's chest, a slow burn that threatened to erupt. He doesn't even see her, Ammani thought, her grip tightening on the handle of her own mop. He sees a uniform, a function, not a person. Jessica, Trey's counterpart at the front desk, was a different kind of predator. Her weapon wasn't outright aggression, but a subtle, insidious erosion of dignity. She'd offer backhanded compliments, make snide comments disguised as jokes, and watch with a detached amusement as the staff scrambled to fulfill her every whim. One evening, Ammani overheard Jessica complaining about a misplaced hand towel in one of the suites. Honestly, she'd said, her voice dripping with disdain, it's like they're deliberately trying to make our lives difficult. The irony was lost on her, the sheer obliviousness to her own role in creating a hostile environment breathtaking. Ammani felt a surge of anger, hot and sharp, but she forced herself to remain silent, her face a carefully blank mask. This isn't about you, Ammani, she reminded herself. This is about them. Keith, the night manager, was a study in indifference. He seemed perpetually shrouded in a fog of weariness, his eyes dull and unfocused. He wasn't actively cruel, but his apathy was a silent endorsement of the prevailing culture of disrespect. He'd clock in, disappear into his office, and emerge only to make his rounds, his gaze sliding past the staff as if they were mere fixtures in the hotel's opulent landscape. Ammani discovered his meticulously crafted timesheets, each entry a carefully constructed lie, padding his hours while the cleaning staff worked tirelessly through the night. The realization left her with a profound sense of disillusionment. This is the system, she thought, the weight of it settling heavy in her heart. A system built on exploitation and silence. The cumulative effect of these small, daily indignities was a slow poison, seeping into Ammani's consciousness. The initial detachment she'd cultivated began to crumble, replaced by a growing sense of unease, then anger, and finally, a steely resolve. She continued to document everything, her notes becoming more detailed, more impassioned. Each entry was a testament to the invisible struggles of the people who kept the Marina Blue running, a silent cry for recognition and respect. The weight of their stories pressed down on her, a heavy burden she now carried as her own. The mask of Janine Walker began to feel less like a disguise and more like a second skin, a shared identity forged in the shared experience of injustice. The line between observer and participant was blurring, and Ammani knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she couldn't remain silent for much longer. The mezzanine floor of the Marina Blue hummed with a low, almost imperceptible vibration, a subtle tremor from the late-night revelry echoing up from the lobby bar. The air, thick with the cloying sweetness of artificial lilies and the faint tang of chlorine from the distant pool, pressed against Ammani like a damp cloth. Under the guise of Janine Walker, she pushed her cleaning cart, the squeaking wheels a counterpoint to the muffled music below. Each rotation of the wheels, each swipe of her cleaning rag, felt like another notch etched into the tally of injustices she'd witnessed in the past few weeks. She could almost taste the bitterness, a metallic tang on the back of her tongue. Tonight, she had planned to focus on documenting Keith's fraudulent timesheets, another piece of the puzzle she was meticulously assembling. But the universe, or perhaps the perverse whims of fate, had a different plan. Trey and Jessica, the two front desk employees who seemed to exist solely to torment the lower staff, as they so eloquently put it, were leaning against the polished marble balustrade, their laughter echoing in the otherwise deserted space. Ammani, head down, focused on buffing the already gleaming brass railing, tried to make herself invisible. Invisibility, she had learned, was a survival tactic in this gilded cage. "Look, it's Janine." Jessica's voice, sharp and brittle as shattered glass, cut through the quiet. Ammani's grip tightened on the cleaning rag. She could feel the familiar clenching in her stomach, a mixture of dread and simmering anger. She hadn't looked up, not yet. Maintaining her charade was crucial. But inside, a storm was brewing. Each snide remark, each dismissive gesture, had chipped away at her carefully constructed facade of indifference. How long could she maintain this detached observation? How long before the simmering anger boiled over? "Hey, Janine," Trey called out, his tone dripping with mock concern. "You missed a spot." He gestured vaguely towards a pristine section of the marble floor. Ammani's internal monologue was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of her, the pragmatic part, urged her to ignore them, to finish her shift and return to the comfortable anonymity of her own life. But another part, a fierce, protective instinct she hadn't known she possessed, yearned to confront them, to strip away their smug superiority and expose them for the petty tyrants they were. She finally lifted her head, her gaze steady, unreadable. "Everything's clean," she responded, her voice flat, devoid of any emotion. It was a practiced neutrality, a shield against their venom. She knew any display of weakness would be pounced upon, dissected, and used against her. Jessica snorted. "Sure it is, sweetie. Just like your future." The cruelty in her voice, so casual, so effortless, sent a jolt of anger through Ammani. It was a low blow, aimed at the vulnerability she tried so desperately to conceal. Ammani's hand trembled just slightly. She forced herself to take a slow, deep breath. "I'll be sure to double-check," she said, her voice still remarkably even. She turned back to the railing, her back to them, the muscles in her shoulders rigid. Each breath was a conscious effort, a battle against the rising tide of fury. She could hear them whispering, their laughter punctuated by hushed, malicious words she couldn't quite decipher. The air crackled with anticipation, a palpable sense of something about to happen. A prickle of unease crawled up her spine. She had the sudden, irrational urge to run, to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the mezzanine. Then, the splash. Icy water cascaded over her, soaking her from head to toe. The shock of the cold stole her breath. For a moment, she stood frozen, the dripping water a chilling reminder of her vulnerability. The silence that followed was more deafening than the laughter that had preceded it. Ammani slowly turned, her gaze fixed on Trey, who was holding an empty bucket, his phone pointed at her, a triumphant smirk plastered on his face. Jessica stood beside him, her hand covering her mouth, feigning shock, but her eyes glittered with malicious glee. In that instant, something inside Ammani shifted. The detached observer, the meticulous documentarian, vanished. The cold water, the blatant disrespect, the sheer audacity of their actions, shattered the last vestiges of her restraint. The anger that had been simmering for weeks finally erupted, a white-hot rage that burned away the fear, the hesitation, the carefully constructed walls she had built around herself. This wasn't just about documenting workplace harassment anymore. This was personal. You think this is funny? Her voice, low and steady, resonated with a power that surprised even her. She didn't raise her voice, didn't shout. The quiet intensity of her words was far more chilling than any outburst could have been. Trey, momentarily taken aback by the unexpected calmness of her response, stammered, "It was just a joke." Ammani took a step towards him, the dripping water forming a small puddle at her feet. "A joke?" she repeated, her voice laced with a chilling irony. "Drenching someone in water, humiliating them in front of your colleague, filming it for your own amusement, that's your idea of a joke?" Jessica, sensing the shift in power, tried to intervene. "Come on, Janine, don't be such a drama queen." Ammani turned her gaze to Jessica, her eyes blazing. "Drama queen?" she echoed, a flicker of a smile playing on her lips. "You haven't seen drama yet." The smile vanished as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by an expression of cold resolve. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "I've been documenting everything," she said, her voice calm and steady. "Every snide remark, every act of harassment, every instance of negligence. And now I have this." She held up her phone, displaying the recording app, the red dot blinking ominously. "Consider this Exhibit A." The blood drained from Trey's face. Jessica's feigned amusement evaporated, replaced by a dawning horror. They stared at her, speechless, the realization of the consequences of their actions slowly sinking in. In the silence, the distant music from the lobby seemed to mock them, a soundtrack to their downfall. The air, still heavy with the scent of lilies and chlorine, now carried a new aroma, the bitter tang of regret. The ornate chandeliers of ballroom cast a brittle, almost clinical light across the assembled staff. The air, thick with the cloying sweetness of disinfectant and the faint, metallic tang of fear, pressed down on Ammani like a physical weight. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a discordant counterpoint to the forced composure she projected. Just hours ago, she had been Janine, the invisible janitor, pushing a mop across these very floors. Now, she stood before them, Ammani Caldwell, heiress to the Caldwell Lux empire, her gaze sweeping over the sea of faces, some curious, some apprehensive, some openly hostile. She recognized Rosa in the back, her weathered hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on Ammani with a mixture of hope and trepidation. The sight of Rosa, a silent testament to the injustices she had witnessed, solidified Ammani's resolve. This wasn't just about proving a point anymore. It was about justice, about giving voice to the voiceless. Her father, Vernon, stood beside her, a silent pillar of support. His presence, usually a source of comfort, felt strangely distant this morning. Perhaps it was the formal suit, a stark contrast to his usual casual attire, Or perhaps it was the gravity of the situation that had erected an invisible barrier between them. Ammani swallowed, the dryness in her throat a stark reminder of the sleepless night she had endured. She had rehearsed this speech countless times, each word carefully chosen, each inflection meticulously planned. Yet, facing the expectant gazes of the hotel staff, the carefully constructed script seemed to crumble in her mind. "Good morning," she began, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. "As some of you may know, I've spent the last few weeks working here at the Marina Blue as Janine Walker, a member of the cleaning staff." A ripple of murmurs ran through the room, the air crackling with a sudden, palpable tension. Trey, his usual swagger replaced by a nervous fidgeting, exchanged a worried glance with Jessica, whose perfectly applied makeup couldn't quite mask the flicker of unease in her eyes. Ammani noted their reactions, a grim satisfaction settling in the pit of her stomach. Their discomfort was a small victory, a prelude to the reckoning that was about to unfold. "During my time here," Ammani continued, her voice gaining strength with each word, "I witnessed firsthand the discrepancies between the Caldwell Lux values and the reality of the work environment experienced by many of our employees." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "I've documented instances of negligence, harassment, and outright unethical behavior." The murmurs intensified, morphing into a cacophony of whispers. Keith, the night manager, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his gaze fixed on the ornate ceiling as if searching for an escape route. Ammani's gaze settled on him, her expression hardening. "Mr. Keith," she addressed him directly, her voice cutting through the noise like a shard of ice. "Perhaps you can explain the discrepancies I found in the employee timesheets." Keith's face paled, a sheen of sweat appearing on his forehead. He stammered, a jumble of incoherent excuses tumbling from his lips. Ammani listened impassively, her silence more damning than any accusation. She then turned her attention to Trey and Jessica, her gaze sharp and unwavering. "And perhaps Mr. Trey and Ms. Jessica can explain the prank they pulled on Janine just yesterday." She clicked a button on the remote, and the large screen behind her flickered to life, displaying the video Trey had recorded. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the muffled sobs of Jessica, whose carefully constructed facade of indifference had finally crumbled. Trey, his face a mask of disbelief and anger, opened his mouth to speak, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. He looked at Ammani, a flicker of fear finally replacing his usual arrogance. "This," Ammani declared, her voice ringing with authority, "is not the Caldwell Lux way. These actions, and many others I've documented, are a betrayal of the trust placed in each and every one of you." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the staff. "Effective immediately, Mr. Keith, Mr. Trey, and Ms. Jessica are terminated." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. The shift in power, palpable and undeniable, sent a tremor through the room. Ammani, no longer the invisible janitor, stood before them, a force to be reckoned with. The fear she had felt earlier had dissipated, replaced by a sense of purpose, a steely resolve to change the system that had allowed such injustices to flourish. She knew this was just the beginning. There was still much work to be done, but for now, she had given a voice to the voiceless, a victory not just for herself, but for Rosa and all the others who had suffered in silence. The air in the ballroom, once heavy with apprehension, now held a different weight, the weight of accountability, the weight of change. The chill of the marble floors seeped through the thin soles of Ammani's shoes, a stark contrast to the simmering anger that still coiled in her gut. Weeks had passed since the incident, since the mask of Janine Walker had been shed, revealing the Caldwell heiress beneath. The Marina Blue, once a symbol of her father's success, now felt like a monument to a carefully constructed blindness. She ran a hand along the cool, polished surface of the front desk, the same desk where Trey and Jessica had held court, their laughter echoing in her memory like a cruel taunt. Gone. Both of them. Along with Keith, the night manager whose casual disregard for his staff had been as suffocating as the humid summer air. The firings had been swift, decisive. Her father, Vernon, had acted with an uncharacteristic ruthlessness, a steeliness she had rarely witnessed. Perhaps he had truly been unaware. Or perhaps he'd simply chosen not to see. The thought tugged at her, a knot of unease tightening in her chest. "Miss Caldwell." A hesitant voice broke through her thoughts. Rosa, one of the cleaning staff, stood a few feet away, a mop clutched in her hand like a shield. Her eyes, usually downcast, held a flicker of something Ammani couldn't quite decipher. Hope? Uncertainty? "The new schedules are posted." Ammani forced a smile, hoping it reached her eyes. "Thank you, Rosa. Have you had a chance to look them over?" Rosa nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Yes, ma'am." The rotating shifts it skewed. The words were small, almost swallowed by the vastness of the lobby. But Ammani heard the unspoken weight behind them. The relief of not being perpetually relegated to the night shift, the burden of invisibility finally eased. Later, in her father's office overlooking the city, Ammani paced, the rhythmic click of her heels a counterpoint to the muted hum of the metropolis below. The new training protocols were in place, outlining clear guidelines for employee conduct, emphasizing respect and accountability. The anonymous reporting system, a digital lifeline for those who had suffered in silence, was live. Yet, a persistent unease lingered. Could these changes truly penetrate the ingrained culture of indifference? "You seem troubled, Ammani." Vernon's voice, calm and measured, broke the silence. He sat behind his imposing desk, the city lights reflecting in his glasses, creating an illusion of detachment. Ammani stopped pacing, turned to face him. "I'm thinking about Rosa," she said, her voice tight. "She told me something insightful. She said that people like her, the cleaning staff, are invisible. They move through the hotel like ghosts, their work unseen, their presence unacknowledged." Vernon leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Invisibility can be a powerful tool, Ammani. Sometimes it's a necessary survival mechanism. But at what cost?" Ammani challenged, her voice rising. "At the cost of their dignity, their well-being? We profited from their invisibility, Father. We allowed it to flourish." A flicker of something guilt? Regret? Crossed Vernon's face, quickly masked by his usual composure. "We are rectifying that now, Ammani. These changes are not merely cosmetic. They are fundamental." Ammani met his gaze, searching for sincerity, for a genuine acknowledgement of the deep-seated rut she had unearthed. "I hope you're right," she said, the words heavy with doubt. "Because if we fail to truly see them, to value their contributions, then all of this is just a performance." The following weeks were a blur of meetings, training sessions, and one-on-one conversations with staff. Ammani made a point of addressing the housekeeping staff directly, acknowledging their hard work, their essential role in the smooth functioning of the hotel. She saw the initial hesitation in their eyes, the ingrained suspicion, slowly melting away, replaced by a cautious optimism. It was a slow, arduous process like thawing frozen ground. One afternoon, as she walked through the lobby, she overheard a conversation between two housekeepers. "Did you see Ms. Caldwell talking to Mr. Henderson?" One whispered, her voice hushed but animated. "She actually thanked him for fixing the leaky faucet in room 302. The other housekeeper nodded, her eyes wide. "I heard she asked Maria about her daughter's graduation." Imagine that. The CEO's daughter asking about our lives. Ammani paused, her heart catching in her throat. It was a small moment, a fleeting exchange, but it held a profound significance. It was a crack in the wall of indifference, a glimmer of light piercing through the darkness. It was a beginning. The transformation wasn't instantaneous. There were setbacks, resistance from some who clung to the old ways, the familiar hierarchy. But the momentum had shifted. The culture of silence was slowly being dismantled, replaced by a tentative, fragile sense of trust. The Marina Blue, once a place of shadows and whispers, was beginning to breathe again. The ghosts, once invisible, were starting to become seen. And Ammani, standing in the heart of her father's empire, felt a flicker of hope ignite within her, a fragile flame in the vastness of the night. The marina blue lobby shimmered, a cathedral of polished marble and cascading crystal chandeliers. Sunlight streamed through the panoramic windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a stark contrast to the shadowy corners Ammani had come to know so intimately. She stood near the back, observing the new trainee orientation, a faint smile playing on her lips. It was strange, almost surreal, to be back in this space, not as Janine Walker, the invisible janitor, but as Ammani Caldwell, the heiress. Yet, the echoes of her undercover experience resonated deep within, a constant hum beneath the surface of her composure. She remembered the sting of disinfectant on her chapped hands, the ache in her lower back after hours of bending and scrubbing, the weight of invisibility that had clung to her like a second skin. The new trainees, a mix of bright-eyed hopefuls and nervous fidgeters, listened intently to the HR representative's spiel about customer service excellence and the Caldwell Lux Properties brand. Ammani's gaze drifted to the front desk, now staffed with new faces. The ghosts of Trey and Jessica lingered, their sneering remarks and condescending laughter still echoing in her memory. She could almost see the trajectory of the water balloon, the splash of cold against her skin, the humiliation burning hotter than any physical discomfort. That moment, the culmination of weeks of subtle and not-so-subtle harassment, had been a turning point. It hadn't just been about the prank itself. It was the blatant disregard, the casual cruelty that had fueled it. It was the realization that this wasn't an isolated incident, but a symptom of a deeper malaise within the company culture. A rot that had spread from the top down, infecting even the most mundane interactions. The HR representative droned on about dress code and punctuality. Ammani's mind, however, was replaying her conversation with her father after the incident. His initial shock had quickly given way to a steely resolve. The internal investigation had been swift and decisive. Keith, the night manager, whose timesheet fraud had been meticulously documented in Ammani's notes, was terminated. Trey and Jessica, their smug confidence shattered by the evidence presented against them, followed suit. The changes weren't limited to personnel. Her father, shaken by the extent of the rot she'd uncovered, had implemented mandatory sensitivity training and a revised employee handbook, emphasizing respect and fair treatment for all staff. The HR representative concluded her presentation, and the room stirred. Ammani took a deep breath, her heart pounding a steady rhythm against her ribs. This was it, her moment to solidify the change she'd initiated. She stepped forward, her presence commanding the attention of the room. "Hello, everyone," she began, her voice clear and steady. "My name is Ammani Caldwell, and I'm here today to talk to you about something very important." She paused, letting her words hang in the air. Internally, she wrestled with a familiar wave of self-doubt. Was she doing the right thing? Was this grand gesture truly effective, or just a performance to appease her own conscience? She pushed the doubt aside, remembering Rosa, the cleaning lady who had confided in her, her voice thick with years of suppressed resentment. Rosa, who represented the countless unseen faces toiling away in the shadows of the opulent hotel. Rosa, whose quiet dignity had ignited a fire within Ammani. "Each of you," Ammani continued, her voice gaining strength, "plays a vital role in the success of the Marina Blue. Whether you're at the front desk greeting guests or ensuring the cleanliness of our facilities, your contribution is invaluable." Her gaze swept over the faces of the trainees, searching for a flicker of recognition, a spark of understanding. "I want to emphasize something that often gets overlooked," she said, her tone sharpening. "Respect. Respect for each other, regardless of job title or uniform." The words hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the usual corporate platitudes. "I've learned," she continued, her voice laced with a newfound authority, "that true luxury isn't just about thread count and marble floors. It's about creating an environment where every individual feels valued, respected, and heard. She paused, her eyes locking with a young woman in the front row, her posture mirroring the nervousness Ammani herself had felt weeks earlier. A hotel is more than just a building. It's a community. And a strong community is built on mutual respect and dignity. The silence in the room was palpable. Ammani's words resonated, a ripple expanding outward, touching each person present. She felt a sense of release, a lightness she hadn't experienced in weeks. The burden of her undercover experience, the weight of the injustices she had witnessed, seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose. Later that day, Ammani sat in her office, overlooking the city skyline. Her phone buzzed. It was her father. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice tinged with a mixture of pride and concern. "It went well," Ammani replied, a genuine smile gracing her lips. "I think they heard me." She paused, gazing out the window at the bustling streets below. "I hope they did," she added, a hint of vulnerability creeping into her voice. "They did," her father assured her. "You made a difference, Ammani. A real difference." Ammani closed her eyes, letting her father's words sink in. The journey had been arduous, a descent into a world she had only glimpsed from afar. But it had been a necessary journey, one that had not only changed the Marina blue, but had transformed her as well. She had entered the shadows as an observer, but she emerged as an advocate, her voice amplified by the echoes of those she had once been invisible to. The fight for true equality, she knew, was far from over. But today, in this moment, she felt a flicker of hope, a quiet conviction that even the smallest spark could ignite a powerful flame.